The movie opens up in a small town, where a man named Dell breaks into a house. He removes all the batteries from the electronic devices and keeps it with him. Then, in a shocking twist, he cleans up the entire house as if it is his own. Before leaving, he also steals a picture that belongs to the owners. Once outside, Dell marks the street in front of the house with spray paint. At this time, we can see several other houses on the street with similar signs, revealing that Dell has already broken into them. Dell believes that he is the last person alive on Earth. An unknown cause has apparently wiped out the entire population, leaving our protagonist alone and sad. To cope with his solitude, he has settled into a very unusual routine. Dell lives in the library where he used to work and takes great care of the books, making sure they are well organized and protected. To sustain himself, he gathers food from supermarkets. He has also taken up fishing as a hobby, since there are still plenty of fish in the lakes. And most importantly, he visits random houses every day, cleans them up, collects any photos and useful items like batteries and gasoline for his truck, and brings all the books back to the library. He also makes sure to mark all the houses he has already visited. One day during his daily routine, Dell breaks into a house and discovers 2 dead bodies. Without any hesitation, he wraps them up tightly with a bed sheet. After this, he loads the corpses into his truck. He then drives to a field, drags the bodies to an empty grave, and buries them in the ground. At night, as Dell is sleeping in his room, he is startled awake by a loud explosion. Quickly springing into action, he peeks through the window and sees fireworks in the distance. This indicates that someone else is also present in the town. However, since it is already dark, Dell is too scared to confront whatever lies there. He simply goes back to sleep, hoping it is nothing dangerous. The following morning, as Dell is scavenging for supplies, he again hears something unusual. This time it is a car alarm which has gone off. Dell locates the car and notices that it has crashed into a wall. When he slowly approaches it, he is shocked to discover a girl lying unconscious in the driver's seat. There is also a gun in the back seat. In the next scene, the young woman, Grace, wakes up and finds herself in a bedroom with a bandage on her head. She feels nauseous and attempts to open the door, only to discover it's locked. When she starts yelling for help, Dell arrives at the door. Without opening it, he inquires if anyone else was with her, and why she was carrying a gun. In response, Grace explains that she hasn't seen anyone else, and that she found the gun on the road. She was only keeping it for safety. But despite the explanation, Dell is skeptical of her, so he decides to send her away. Once outside, Grace wonders why she can't smell the decomposing corpses, and Dell informs her that he has already buried them. He then hands her the car keys and asks her to leave, but Grace wants to stay with him. She is scared that she might die of hunger or diseases. However, Dell coldly ignores her pleas and walks away. Later, Grace can be seen following Dell quietly around the city, wherever he goes. She even observes him while he is fishing. Eventually, she follows him back to the library and offers to help him clear the dead bodies in town. This finally changes Dell's mind, and he shares his food with her. When she asks him about the sudden disappearance of people, he refuses to engage in casual conversation or discuss theories about the cause of the apocalypse. However, the persistent girl keeps on talking. She asks Dell if he has ever felt lonely, to which he replies that it does not matter to him, because he has always been lonely since his birth. Hearing his cold responses, Grace realizes that he isn't interested in companionship and decides to leave. But as she reaches the car, Dell has a sudden change in mind. He quickly approaches her and asks if she wants to stay with him. Excited, Grace immediately accepts and rushes inside the library. The next day, she settles into the same room where Dell brought her after her accident. During the day, while driving around, Dell notices Grace heading towards a locality which he hasn't cleaned yet. Worried, he approaches her and emphasizes the importance of following his specific cleaning methods. He then starts teaching her all the steps, right from searching for the batteries to collecting all the books. Later on, they visit a house and load some corpses in their truck. When it's time to bury them, Grace suddenly asks if they are going to pray, because it is a very sensitive procedure. Dell mentions that he has never done so, but when the persistent girl insists, he closes his eyes for 10 seconds and chants a few words. One day, as Grace is walking through the streets, she hears a dog barking from a nearby house. Being an animal lover, she quickly enters the house, retrieves the small dog, and brings it back to the library. Dell is taken aback to see the puppy, but he allows her to keep it anyway. Later, when Grace asks for help in naming the dog, Dell refuses, so she simply names it Dog. The next morning, Grace briefly looks at a scar on her neck, indicating that she has had a troubled past. She hides it completely with her hair, and then heads to the library. There, as Dell is rearranging some books, he notices the dog chewing on a magazine. Enraged, he tries to pick it up, but ends up getting bitten in the hand. The following day, Grace wakes up and finds that the dog is missing. She frantically informs Dell about it, and the latter admits that he had let the dog out to urinate. Shortly after, as the two are searching the locality, it suddenly dawns on Grace that Dell has killed the dog for biting him the other day. When they return to the library, Grace drinks a lot of wine to drown her sorrows. She then enters Dell's room and places his collection of photos on the table. In an intoxicated state, she points out that Dell doesn't know any of the people in the pictures, and that he treats them as mere objects. After this, she reveals that she was with a boy when the apocalypse took place. He cared for her and always kept her happy, unlike Dell, who was always alone. In a fit of rage, Grace then grabs the photos and throws them at him, before storming out of the room. The next day, Dell realizes his mistake and invites Grace to a greenhouse. He explains to her that there are still many houses that need to be cleared and asks for her help, but also assures her that she's not obligated to assist. Surprisingly, Grace forgives him and agrees to help him. Later, as they are cleaning up a house, they find a pair of walkie-talkies and start using it. This helps them bridge the communication gap between them, and by the end of the week, the duo manages to clean up all the houses in the neighborhood. In the next scene, Grace embarks on a journey on her bike and discovers an unmarked house. Using the walkie-talkie, she contacts Dell and summons him to the place. But surprisingly, as soon as he arrives there, he gets emotional. It turns out it is Dell's own house, and he has never visited the place after the apocalypse took place. The corpses of his family members still lay in their rooms, but Dell is too scared to confront them. Hearing his story, Grace offers to help him out. Dell also gathers some courage, and together, the two wipe out the whole place in no time and head home. Afterward, during a car ride, Grace attempts to share information about her origins with Dell. The latter also becomes curious and stops the car. However, instead of speaking, she suddenly kisses him. The next day, Dell wakes up to the sound of someone laughing in the dining room. Worried, he grabs a gun and slowly heads downstairs, only to discover a man and a woman with Grace. Dell is shocked to see other people, as he was under the impression that they were the only ones alive on the planet. The man introduces himself as Patrick and claims that Grace is his daughter. He questions why Grace never talked Dell about them and urges her to reveal the truth. After some hesitation, Grace admits that Patrick and Violet are not her real parents, but foster ones. This leaves Dell completely baffled, and he has no words to say. When the situation becomes awkward, Violet breaks the silence by asking Grace to pack her things. She insists that they will be returning home to California. Later, as Patrick talks about his golf friends, he realizes that Dell is unaware of the other survivors. He then scolds Grace for not informing Dell about the thousands of survivors, and reveals that they have placed signs on highways across the country to guide people to their community. Enraged that so much had been kept from him, Dell walks out of the house and prepares to leave. Grace follows him and confesses that Patrick and Violet are not her actual parents. She explains that she was assigned to be with them when she arrived in California. Dell expresses his disappointment at Grace for lying about them being the only survivors, and she admits that she was afraid he wouldn't let her stay if he knew the truth. Grace desperately pleads with Dell to take her with him. However, when she tries to prevent him from leaving by holding onto the steering wheel, he forcefully removes her hand and drives away. Later, Patrick visits the library and asks Dell for audiobooks, but the latter ignores him. Despite this, Patrick compliments Dell's intelligence and suggests they could use someone like him in California. He explains that their commune has doctors who discovered ways to unlock the potential of the human brain. However, Dell remains uninterested and dismissive. When he doesn't reply to anything, Patrick writes his address in a book and leaves it with Dell in case he changes his mind. After a while, Grace tearfully watches Dell as they drive away from the library on their journey to California. For the next few days, Dell remains focused on his work and tries to avoid any sort of distractions, but then he begins missing Dell and ultimately becomes depressed. He sometimes turns on the walkie-talkie, hoping to hear her lovely voice. One day, Dell looks through his photo collection and reminisces about the people in the pictures. Overwhelmed by loneliness, he decides to visit Grace and searches for the book with Patrick's address. After finding it, he sets off for California in his truck. During his journey, Dell encounters a blocked bridge with cars and deceased people. However, he does not stop and changes cars to continue the journey. Eventually, after changing a couple of cars and nearly finishing his supplies, he arrives at his destination. Dell notices the family from the glass door, but he waits for the parents to fall asleep at night. Once the lights in the living room are off, he enters the house with a gun in hand. He goes straight to Grace's room, hoping to surprise her, but sees something shocking instead. Grace is in a deep sleep, connected to an ECG monitor. She has also been injected with stitches on her neck. Worried, Dell quickly wakes her up, removes the wires, and apologizes for letting Patrick take her. As they try to leave, Patrick walks into the room and orders Grace to go back to bed. He then reveals to Dell that he is doing all this to eliminate negative emotions like anger, sadness, and guilt. This will effectively wipe out the entire history before the apocalypse occurred. As Patrick continues explaining his ideology, Grace unexpectedly snatches Dell's gun and shoots him. This kills poor Patrick on the spot. Shortly after, Violet arrives at the scene with a calm demeanor. She appears to be totally unaffected by the death of her husband. This reveals that her emotions have already been compromised. The next morning, Grace carries her goldfish out of the house and gets into a car with Dell. As they drive away, he observes the town's cheerful residents busy with their activities. The movie ends as Dell plays loud rock music and gently smiles at Grace. So if this video is good, then like the video and comment and subscribe the channel. See you soon in another video. Good day.